Imagine for a moment gazing upon an ancient map, not just a static drawing of kingdoms and borders, but a living, breathing tapestry where every castle, every winding road, and every bustling city pulsed with a hidden energy, an unseen yet absolute control that shaped countless lives and destinies for centuries. We often picture the medieval world through a romanticized lens, filled with chivalrous knights and grand adventures, but beneath that surface lay a far more intricate and compelling reality. This reality was built on a sophisticated network where power wasn't just wielded through brute force or grand declarations, but subtly woven into the very fabric of the landscape itself. Have you ever stopped to consider how a single, imposing stone fortress, perched high on a hill, could effectively govern an entire region hundreds of miles away from a king's capital? Or how a seemingly humble dirt path could become a vital artery for the flow of wealth, information, and military might, dictating the rise and fall of empires? What about the vibrant walled cities teeming with merchants and artisans that were not merely centers of commerce but also crucial nodes in a vast system of surveillance and administrative oversight? These elements, castles, roads, and cities, were not isolated features. They were deeply interconnected, forming a coherent, organic whole that gave true shape and structure to medieval authority. They worked in concert, each supporting and reinforcing the others, creating a subtle yet incredibly effective mechanism for exercising power across vast and often challenging terrains. This wasn't just about military dominance, it was about the strategic genius behind their placement, their design, and their harmonious interaction. Medieval control was far more intricate than simply sending an army. It was an elaborate ballet of logistics, economics, and psychological influence, all orchestrated through this physical architecture. Today, we're going to peel back those romanticized layers of history and delve deep into what we call the anatomy of a kingdom. We'll explore how this hidden network of control defined medieval power structures, revealing that the castles were not just defensive strongholds but command centers. The roads were not just pathways but the very veins of power, and the cities were not just marketplaces but the beating heart of governance. This journey will offer a profound understanding of how centralized authority was established and maintained, and you'll quickly discover that the ingenious principles behind this system resonate even in our modern world, providing powerful insights into the enduring nature of power itself. Prepare to see the medieval world in a whole new light, recognizing the subtle yet monumental forces that shaped it. Our journey into this hidden anatomy begins with its very core, the sovereign's citadel, the castle. While often romanticized as mere defensive strongholds bristling with archers and boiling oil, castles were, in reality, the beating heart and nerve center of medieval power. Think of them not just as fortifications, but as the brain of the kingdom, channeling information, issuing commands, and coordinating every aspect of governance. Each castle embodied the very essence of the monarch's or lord's authority, making their presence felt far beyond their stone walls. These monumental structures were never built haphazardly. Their placement was always strategic, dominating key landscapes, whether it was a river crossing, a mountain pass, or a natural high ground. This elevated position wasn't just for defense. It projected an undeniable aura of invincibility and majesty, a constant visual reminder to everyone in the surrounding lands of who held the reins of power. From their imposing towers, a ruler could literally survey their dominio, broadcasting their control across vast territories without uttering a single word. It was a tangible manifestation of authority, a silent but powerful declaration of sovereignty. Beyond their defensive capabilities and symbolic might, castles functioned as bustling administrative hubs. They were living, breathing centers of governance, housing not only the lord and his family but also a dedicated garrison of soldiers, ready to enforce decrees or defend the realm. Within their sturdy walls, you would find the kingdom's treasury, safeguarding the wealth that fueled its operations. More importantly, castles were often the seat of legal courts, where disputes were settled, laws were enforced, and justice, or at least the lord's version of it, was dispensed. This multifaceted role, encompassing military, financial, and judicial functions, made castles indispensable to the medieval system of governance. They were integrated systems for managing resources, administering law, and projecting military force, all from one centralized location. Understanding this multifaceted role of the castle is absolutely crucial to grasping the true extent of medieval governance. Without these command centers, the kingdom would have been a fragmented collection of disparate territories. Instead, the castle served as the anchor, the point of origin for authority, much like how the brain controls every function of the body from thought to movement. It was the hub from which all directives flowed, ensuring a semblance of order and control in an often chaotic world. From the castle's command center, power truly flowed outwards through the kingdom's vital arteries, its roads. Now, when we think of medieval roads, our minds often conjure images of muddy, rutted tracks, barely passable, and certainly nothing like our modern superhighways. Yet, these seemingly rudimentary paths were, in fact, the veins of power, absolutely essential for the very survival and cohesion of any medieval realm. They weren't just routes, they were carefully considered strategic pathways enabling the swift movement of troops, the exchange of goods, and most crucially, the rapid flow of information. Without these connections, the kingdom would have fractured into isolated, ungovernable pockets. These routes were not random. They were meticulously planned and often maintained with surprising diligence, especially those critical to royal interests. Imagine them as a carefully constructed web, designed to connect those powerful castles to burgeoning cities and to resource rich areas like mines or fertile agricultural lands. This foresight facilitated an incredibly rapid military response when needed. If a rebellion flared up in a distant province or an invading army crossed the border, the ability to move soldiers quickly along these established routes was paramount. Similarly, they allowed for the efficient collection of taxes, funneling wealth from the countryside and urban centers back to the royal treasury, reinforcing the central authority discussed earlier. The strategic placement of these roads directly determined the speed at which royal decrees could travel across the realm, influencing decisions and ensuring compliance. A king's word, traveling at the pace of a mounted messenger, could reach the far corners of his domain, allowing him to react to events and assert his will. This also applied to the flow of commerce. Goods, from grain to luxury items, traveled along these same routes, generating wealth not just for merchants, but also for the lords who controlled the roads and levied tolls. In this way, these roads acted as invisible conduits of influence and control, reaching into the daily lives of every subject, whether they realized it or not. Consider for a moment a kingdom without such a network. It would be an unmanageable collection of disparate, self-sufficient communities, each vulnerable and isolated. The castle, no matter how strong, could only project its power so far. It was the roads that extended its reach, transforming a collection of territories into a unified, functioning entity. They enabled communication, trade, and defense on a kingdom-wide scale, demonstrating that true power wasn't just about holding strong points, but about connecting them, weaving them into a cohesive whole that could be governed and defended. These roads, though often overlooked, were just as fundamental to the anatomy of a kingdom as the imposing castles themselves, constantly circulating the lifeblood of power throughout the realm. While roads formed the essential network circulating power, the true pulse of the medieval kingdom beat within its burgeoning cities. These urban centers were far more than just collections of buildings. They were the bustling economic and cultural hearts, vibrant hubs where innovation, commerce, and social life converged. But just like the castles and roads, they too served as powerful instruments of control, albeit in a more subtle, often less overtly militaristic way. Think of them as massive, organic machines, generating wealth and influence, all while feeding into the larger system of royal authority. At the core of every medieval city was its marketplace, a vibrant nexus of activity where goods from the surrounding countryside and distant lands were bought, sold, and traded. This constant flow of commerce wasn't just about economic exchange. It was a wellspring of revenue for the crown or local lord. Every transaction, every cart entering or leaving the city gates was an opportunity to levy tolls and collect taxes. These hidden costs, often unseen by the casual observer, steadily filled the royal coffers, providing the financial muscle needed to fund armies, maintain infrastructure, and sustain the very administration that kept the kingdom running. The marketplaces, therefore, were not just places of trade. They were economic engines fueling the machinery of hidden control. Beyond the raw economics, cities were also home to powerful urban guilds and institutions, from the masons and bakers to the merchants and scribes. These guilds, while providing essential services and fostering specialized crafts, were rarely independent entities. More often than not, their very existence and privileges were granted through royal charters, formal documents issued by the monarch. This seemingly benevolent act of granting charters was, in reality, a clever mechanism for ensuring loyalty and order. By making the guilds beholden to royal authority, rulers could influence their policies, settle disputes, and even suppress nascent rebellions. The guilds, in turn, benefited from royal protection and a structured framework for trade, creating a symbiotic relationship where fealty was exchanged for prosperity. The sheer density of the population within city walls also offered unique advantages for governance and surveillance. Unlike the sprawling countryside, a city's concentrated populace made it easier to administer, collect taxes, and maintain social order. Royal officials, tax collectors, and even spies could operate more efficiently in a confined urban space. This close proximity allowed for a greater degree of oversight, making cities crucial nodes in the network of governance. From monitoring public sentiment to enforcing royal decrees, the urban environment provided a ready-made laboratory for exercising centralized control. Ultimately, the growth and prosperity of these vital urban centers were directly tied to the stability offered by the overarching control system. A city could only thrive if its trade routes were secure, its markets protected, and its laws enforced. The king's peace, maintained by the castles and enforced by the swift movement of troops along the roads, was the bedrock upon which urban prosperity was built. In essence, the cities, while appearing to be free-wheeling engines of commerce, were in fact integral components of the kingdom's anatomy, their very existence and success dependent on, and contributing to, the larger, often hidden, network of royal control. They were the vibrant, beating heart, but that heart was firmly held within the king's grip. Building on the powerful influence of cities, let's now consider the dynamic interplay between two other cornerstones of medieval control, castles and roads. While cities thrived as economic engines, their vitality, and indeed the entire kingdom's stability, depended heavily on the strategic relationship between fortified strongholds and the arteries that connected them. Imagine for a moment a medieval landscape not as a random collection of features, but as a meticulously designed network where every castle served a purpose far beyond mere defense. Castles were rarely positioned haphazardly. Instead, their locations were chosen with an almost surgical precision, often to overlook or guard critical road junctions, narrow mountain passes, or vital river crossings. This strategic placement wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate choice to maximize their control over movement and communication. Picture a winding road snaking through a valley, and then imagine a formidable castle perched high above it, its towers casting a long shadow over anyone who dared to traverse that path. This commanding view afforded the lord or monarch direct oversight of traffic, allowing them to monitor trade, track travelers, and intercept potential threats. This strategic pairing of castles and roads provided rulers with an unparalleled opportunity to control movement and, more importantly, to collect tolls. Every merchant cart laden with goods, every traveler on horseback, every pilgrim seeking spiritual solace, and every messenger carrying vital dispatches became a revenue source. These tolls, often levied at major checkpoints or bridges, were a hidden tax on commerce, steadily flowing into the royal coffers. Think of it as a medieval customs system where the very act of passage contributed to the kingdom's wealth. This constant stream of income provided the financial backbone for maintaining armies, constructing more infrastructure, and extending the reach of central authority. Beyond mere taxation, this territorial dominance also served a crucial role in projecting power over trade routes. By controlling these economic lifelines, rulers could effectively regulate commerce, ensuring that certain goods reached their intended destinations while others might be restricted or rerouted. This level of oversight provided an economic leverage that few other systems could match. It meant that trade was not truly free but operated under the watchful eye and direct influence of the ruling power, solidifying a hidden grip on the economic life of the realm. Furthermore, the strategic placement of castles along roads allowed for the restriction of unauthorized travel. This wasn't merely about collecting tolls, it was about maintaining social order and preventing the free movement of potentially disruptive elements. Bandits, rebellious factions, or even foreign spies would find it far more challenging to move unseen through a landscape dotted with watchful castles. These fortifications acted as filters, allowing legitimate travelers to pass while deterring or apprehending those who might threaten the king's peace. This control over movement was a powerful tool for law enforcement and internal security, making the kingdom a more predictable and governable entity. The hidden grip on economic and social life, facilitated by this symbiotic relationship between castles and roads, was a cornerstone of medieval governance. It ensured the flow of wealth, regulated commerce, and maintained internal security, all contributing to the stability and power of the ruling elite. This intricate web of control, often unseen by the ordinary peasant or merchant, was the very mechanism that allowed medieval kingdoms to function and prosper, transforming mere physical structures into instruments of immense power. Just as crucial for the kingdom's stability was the deep connection between its cities and its roads. Cities, bustling with artisans, merchants, and administrators, were the vibrant economic and social engines of medieval life. But these urban centers could not exist in isolation. They were utterly dependent on roads which served as their lifelines, linking them to everything they needed to survive and thrive. Think of a city as a living organism. Without its circulatory system, it would quickly wither. Roads were that vital system, transporting sustenance from agricultural hinterlands, the grains, meat, and produce essential to feed a dense urban population. Without these continuous flows, a city would face immediate famine and collapse. Beyond basic sustenance, roads were the indispensable arteries of trade, connecting cities to one another and to distant markets. They allowed for the movement of raw materials to workshops, finished products to consumers, and specialized goods from one region to another. This intricate network of trade routes fostered economic growth, specialization, and cultural exchange, making cities centers of innovation and wealth. Imagine the silk from the east, the furs from the north, or the fine woolens from England, all traveling along these routes, enriching the urban economies they touched. The prosperity of a city was directly proportional to the efficiency and security of its road connections. However, this vital dependence on roads also created a profound vulnerability. This connection, while essential for prosperity, meant that cities were incredibly susceptible to disruption. If roads were blockaded by rebellious factions, roving bandits, or even enemy armies, the flow of food, goods, and information would immediately cease. A blockaded city faced starvation, economic stagnation, and isolation. This made cities intrinsically reliant on the protection and maintenance provided by royal or lordly authority. The crown, in turn, understood this vulnerability and leveraged it as a subtle yet potent form of control. Consider the implications of this reliance. The power to open or close these arterial networks gave the ruling authority immense leverage over urban populations and their economies. Neglect of infrastructure, such as allowing bridges to crumble or roads to fall into disrepair, could choke a city's economic life just as effectively as a direct siege. Conversely, investing in road construction and ensuring their security fostered prosperity, reinforcing the legitimacy and necessity of the ruler's presence. This wasn't always about overt force. Often, it was about the quiet assurance of order and access that only a centralized power could provide. This control over the urban nexus was a powerful tool in the hands of medieval rulers. It allowed them to influence markets, regulate trade, and ensure the loyalty of city dwellers who knew their livelihoods depended on the stability and security offered by the crown. The subtle art of maintaining these critical connections meant that the kingdom's rulers held a powerful, often hidden, sway over the very heartbeat of their realms, shaping not just physical landscapes, but also the economic destinies of thousands. This vital connection between cities and roads brings us to another critical relationship within the kingdom's anatomy: the fortified market, the intertwined destinies of castles, and the cities that often grew up in their shadow. It was a relationship built on a fascinating blend of mutual dependence and undeniable power imbalance. For the burgeoning urban populations, the castle was a formidable guarantor of safety. It was a physical bulwark against external threats, from marauding armies to roaming bands of brigands that plagued the medieval countryside. The thick walls and vigilant garrisons offered a sense of security that allowed merchants to trade, artisans to craft, and citizens to live with a degree of stability, knowing their homes and livelihoods were protected. This protection extended not just to their lives but also to their markets, which were the very heart of urban commerce. Without the castle's intimidating presence, the wealth accumulated within city walls would have been an irresistible magnet for lawlessness. In return for this invaluable security, the cities became indispensable to the castles. They were the primary source of labor, supplying the manpower needed for everything from construction and repairs to domestic service within the castle walls. More importantly, cities were teeming with taxable populations and vibrant markets, providing the castle with a steady stream of revenue. The tolls collected on goods entering and leaving the city, the taxes levied on its inhabitants, and the constant flow of provisions from its merchants ensured the castle's survival and the lord's prosperity. Imagine the logistics of feeding a large garrison, maintaining weaponry, and funding court life without the constant supply lines and financial contributions flowing from a nearby urban center. The city was in essence the castle's economic engine, powering its very existence. This arrangement wasn't simply a benevolent partnership. It allowed the lord to exert direct and profound influence over nearly every facet of urban life. From their fortified vantage point, lords could dictate urban development, controlling where new buildings were erected, how markets were structured, and even the layout of streets. Their oversight extended to trade policies, setting tariffs, regulating merchant guilds, and ensuring that commerce flowed in ways that benefited the castle first and foremost. Even the social order within the city walls fell under their purview, with castle courts often having the final say in disputes and upholding laws that maintained peace and productivity. This created a powerful and expansive sphere of influence, effectively bringing the city under the direct administrative and economic control of the castle. Thus, the castle was more than just a military stronghold. It was the anchor of a fortified sphere of influence, a visible symbol of authority that shaped the economic, social, and political landscape of the city beneath it. This dynamic meant that while cities thrived under the castle's protection, they did so on terms largely set by the lord. Their prosperity was often a direct reflection of the castle's stability and the lord's acumen, but it also underscored their complete reliance on that power. It was a subtle yet powerful mechanism of control, where the provision of security and order translated directly into the ability to govern, tax, and direct the vibrant life of the urban center, ensuring the continuous flow of resources and loyalty into the hands of the ruling authority. This fascinating arrangement between castles and cities brings us to an even broader understanding of the kingdom's anatomy, the feudal web itself. You see, the intricate system of vassalage, with its layers of loyalty and land tenure, wasn't just a legal or social construct. It was deeply, fundamentally interwoven with the very physical infrastructure of the kingdom. It's almost as if the invisible threads of loyalty and obligation had tangible counterparts in the form of castles and roads. Think of it this way: a king at the top of the feudal pyramid would grant vast tracts of land known as fiefs to his most powerful nobles, the dukes, counts, and barons, in exchange for military service and loyalty. These great lords, in turn, would subdivide their fiefs, granting smaller portions to their own vassals, who might be minor lords or knights, and what formed the heart of many of these granted lands. Often it was a minor castle, a fortified manor house, or even just a strong tower, serving as the dwelling and base of operations for the vassal. These smaller fortifications, though not as grand as royal castles, were crucial nodes in the network. They were the local centers of authority, places where justice was dispensed, taxes were collected, and local militias were mustered. Now, none of this intricate hierarchy could have functioned without connection. All these decentralized strongholds, from the grand royal castles to the humble fortified manors, were linked by a network of roads. These weren't always paved highways, mind you, but they were established routes, paths that allowed messengers to carry royal decrees, for armies to march, and for goods and taxes to flow from the periphery back to the center. So, while a lord might swear an oath of fealty to his king, that oath was reinforced and made manifest by the physical reality of his castle and the roads connecting it to his overlord. It was through these physical ties that the king could enforce his authority, demand military service, and most importantly, collect the levies and taxes that funded his kingdom. This illustrates a profound truth about medieval power. Social control mirrored spatial control. the ability of a lord to maintain loyalty and extract resources from his vassals and their lands was directly tied to the infrastructure that allowed him to project his power. If a vassal rebelled, the king didn't just send a strongly worded letter. He could send an army marching down those very same roads to besiege the rebellious castle. The physical presence of these fortifications and the pathways between them were not just conveniences, they were the concrete embodiment of power, ensuring that oaths were kept and that the hierarchical structure of feudal society remained intact. Without a tangible connection, the invisible bonds of fealty would have quickly unraveled, leaving the kingdom fragmented and ungovernable. Beyond the grand castles and the vital roads we've discussed, a more subtle, yet equally crucial, layer of control permeated the medieval kingdom, the pervasive system of surveillance. This wasn't just about massive fortifications. It extended into the very pulse of daily life through networks of watchtowers and regular patrols. Imagine small, isolated watchtowers dotting the landscape, strategically placed on hills or at critical choke points like narrow valleys and river crossings. These were the kingdom's eyes and ears, constantly scanning the horizon. These seemingly modest structures were far more than just lookouts. They were integral components of a sophisticated early warning system. From their elevated positions, sentries could spot approaching armies, raiding parties, or even large groups of suspicious travelers hours, sometimes even days, before they reached major population centers or royal strongholds. The swift relay of this information, often through a series of signal fires or flag systems, allowed the king or local lord to mobilize defenses, warn the populace, or prepare their forces. This real-time intelligence was invaluable in an age where communication was slow and threats could materialize with terrifying speed. It was this constant vigilance that often made the difference between a successful defense and a catastrophic defeat, fundamentally extending the king's reach far beyond his immediate castle walls. But surveillance wasn't confined to fixed points. Regular patrols along key roads and trade routes were another indispensable element of this hidden control. These mobile units, often comprised of knights, mounted sergeants, or armed guards, served multiple critical functions. Their primary role was to suppress banditry, a persistent menace that plagued medieval travel and commerce. By making these routes safer, the patrols ensured the free flow of goods and people, which was vital for the kingdom's economic health. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of highway patrol, ensuring a degree of law and order in areas that were otherwise vulnerable and remote. Their presence deterred criminals and, when necessary, brought them to local justice, reinforcing the sovereign's claim to peace and order across the land. Furthermore, these patrols played a pivotal role in ensuring the safe passage of royal messengers and merchants. In an era before instant communication, messengers were the lifeblood of administration, carrying royal edicts, diplomatic dispatches, and vital intelligence across vast distances. Their safety was paramount, and the patrols provided an armed escort or at least a reassuring presence along their perilous journeys. For merchants, whose caravans were often laden with valuable goods, the patrols offered a degree of security that encouraged trade and contributed to the kingdom's tax base. This direct protection of key personnel and economic activity demonstrated the tangible benefits of centralized authority, making the king's presence felt even in the most remote corners of his realm. Beyond protection and law enforcement, these watchtowers and patrols served as a subtle but powerful mechanism for intelligence gathering. Every traveler, every merchant, every returning soldier could be a source of information. Patrols could question suspicious individuals, gather rumors from inns and villages, and report back on local sentiments or potential unrest. This continuous stream of ground-level intelligence flowed back to the castles, providing the monarch with a more complete picture of what was happening across the kingdom. It allowed rulers to anticipate problems, identify potential dissent, and understand the pulse of their territories. This constant, pervasive observation acted as a powerful deterrent against rebellion and unlawful activity, essentially creating an invisible web of eyes and ears that extended the kingdom's reach and reinforced its hidden grip on power. Now, beyond the visible power of fortifications and the watchful eyes of patrols, a more subtle yet profoundly impactful layer of control manifested in the economic sphere, the systematic leveraging of tolls and trade routes. Picture this: every major road, every river crossing, every bridge, especially those near castles or fortified towns, became a potential choke point, a gateway through which all goods and travelers had to pass. These strategic locations weren't just about defense. They were meticulously chosen to generate revenue for the crown and the local lords. When a merchant caravan laden with precious silks or barrels of wine approached a guarded bridge, they weren't just crossing a river, they were entering a taxation zone. The levying of tolls on goods and travelers was a highly organized and vital source of income for medieval rulers. These weren't arbitrary fees. They were often codified, sometimes even written into charters, detailing precisely what was owed for various commodities. For example, a cart of grain might incur one toll, while a pack horse carrying spices would be taxed differently. This system transformed the kingdom's very infrastructure, its meticulously planned roads and strategically placed castles, into a vast, interconnected profit-generating enterprise. Imagine the cumulative wealth amassed from countless such transactions occurring daily across an entire kingdom. This consistent flow of revenue was indispensable, funding the monarch's standing armies, supporting the sprawling state administration, and contributing to the lavish courts that defined royal power. It was a hidden tax on commerce, felt by everyone from the wealthy merchant to the humble peasant bringing a few bushels to market, directly linking the kingdom's economic vitality to its hidden mechanisms of control. The very act of moving goods, essential for survival and prosperity, became an act of economic submission to the ruling authority. This economic leverage afforded by controlling trade routes was a powerful, often overlooked form of hidden control. It allowed rulers to influence the flow of goods, dictate prices in certain regions, and even restrict access for undesirable merchants or products. If a particular region was rebellious, tolls could be raised to stifle its economy, or trade routes could be rerouted to bypass it entirely, effectively isolating and punishing the dissident population without direct military intervention. Conversely, favored towns or loyal lords might receive exemptions or reduced tolls, fostering their prosperity and reinforcing their allegiance. This control extended beyond mere taxation. It was a tool for political manipulation and social engineering. The ability to grant or refuse passage, to impose or waive tolls, gave the crown immense power over the economic destinies of towns, guilds, and individual merchants. This intricate web of economic influence meant that even those who never saw a royal army or were directly subject to a lord's justice were still deeply embedded in and controlled by the kingdom's centralized economic system, making their daily bread contingent on the sovereign's will. Beyond the critical economic leverage derived from controlling trade and travel, the castles themselves served a far deeper purpose as the very backbone of administrative control. Each castle was more than just a military stronghold. It often stood as a vibrant local administrative center, a miniature version of the royal court, extending the monarch's reach directly into the farthest corners of the kingdom. Think of it as the ultimate local government office, but one that could also withstand a siege. Within these formidable walls, a complex web of governance unfolded. Justice was dispensed right there in the castle's great hall, presided over by the lord or his appointed representative, ensuring that disputes were settled and laws were enforced according to royal decree or feudal custom. This immediate presence of legal authority reinforced the idea that royal justice was accessible and present, not just a distant concept. Furthermore, castles were crucial record-keeping hubs. Scribes and clerks meticulously maintained charters, land deeds, tax registers, and legal judgments, serving as the memory of the local administration. These records were vital for understanding property rights, lineage, and, perhaps most importantly, who owed what in taxes or military service. The ability to track and organize this information allowed for a more systematic and effective form of governance, laying the groundwork for more centralized bureaucratic systems that would emerge later. Local ordinances were not just proclaimed, they were enforced and recorded within the castle's sphere of influence, directly impacting the daily lives of the surrounding populace. This meticulous attention to administrative detail solidified the castle's role as a true pillar of the kingdom's operational structure, ensuring that the wheels of governance turned smoothly and efficiently. Moreover, the presence of royal officials, whether residing directly within the castle or in a nearby fortified manor, was absolutely critical. These individuals served as the monarch's eyes and ears on the ground, a direct line from the central authority to the local populace. They were tasked with ensuring compliance with royal decrees, overseeing the collection of taxes that powered the kingdom, and gathering intelligence on potential unrest or threats. Their residency demonstrated a continuous royal presence, not just during times of war or crisis, but as an ongoing reality of daily life. This localized authority ensured that the central command could effectively project its will and maintain order across vast and diverse territories. It was through these local administrative hubs that the abstract power of the crown became a tangible, everyday presence, demonstrating that control in a medieval kingdom was not only about macro-level strategic planning, but also about meticulous, micro-level execution and oversight. This intricate administrative web within the castles naturally brings us to another foundational pillar of medieval control: military logistics. The entire network of castles and roads was, in essence, a masterclass in military efficiency. Imagine the kingdom as a vast chessboard and each castle a strategically placed piece, designed not just for defense but for swift offense and rapid response. Garrisons, the permanent military occupants of these castles, were not just idly waiting for an attack. They were strategically positioned along vital routes, at choke points, and near potential areas of unrest, ready to spring into action as an immediate deterrent or a first line of defense. Their deployment was a calibrated art, ensuring that no major region was left vulnerable and that any spark of rebellion could be immediately extinguished. These resident forces were essential for quickly responding to local threats, whether it was suppressing banditry that plagued trade routes, dealing with minor border skirmishes, or quelling localized peasant uprisings. Their presence meant that issues could often be resolved before they escalated into full-blown crises, requiring a larger, slower response from the capital. This localized military presence reinforced the king's peace, ensuring a level of stability that was crucial for economic activity and social order. It was a proactive approach to maintaining control, projecting military readiness even in times of supposed peace. The very sight of a well-maintained castle and its patrolling soldiers was a constant reminder of the state's power, discouraging dissent before it could even begin. However, no single garrison could handle every major threat. This is where the roads became absolutely vital. These pathways, often rough and unpaved by modern standards, were the conduits for rapid reinforcement. When a larger threat emerged, perhaps an invading army or a widespread rebellion, the capital could dispatch greater forces along these very arteries. Think of it as a medieval highway system allowing an emergency response team to reach any troubled area of the kingdom with relative speed. The strategic placement of each castle meant that these reinforcing armies would always have safe havens, supply points, and defensible positions along their arduous journeys. This integrated system ensured that the king's military power was not just theoretical, but could be projected swiftly and effectively across vast distances, maintaining order through the credible and very real threat of overwhelming force. It was this seamless coordination between fixed fortifications and mobile armies that truly secured the kingdom's borders and its internal stability. Beyond the movement of troops and supplies, the true efficiency of medieval governance hinged on something even more subtle yet equally vital: the rapid transmission of information. Imagine a time before telephones, before the internet, before even the printing press could widely disseminate news. In such an era, roads weren't just pathways for armies. They were the very arteries through which the lifeblood of the kingdom flowed, information itself. Royal messengers, often riding tirelessly for days, were the human equivalent of today's high-speed data networks. They carried royal edicts, proclamations meant to be heard and obeyed across vast territories, ensuring that the king's word was law, even in the most remote corners of the realm. These trusted couriers, often traveling with armed escorts, were also responsible for ferrying intelligence reports from border garrisons, distant lords, and spies within rival territories. This intelligence was crucial for strategic decision-making, allowing rulers to anticipate threats, prepare defenses, and respond proactively to unfolding events. Diplomatic communications, too, relied entirely on these road networks. Ambassadors carrying delicate messages of alliance or terms of peace between kingdoms would journey for weeks, their success dependent on secure passage along these routes. The information they carried could avert wars or spark them, making their safe transit a matter of national security. The control over these essential routes meant direct control over the flow of information. A ruler who controlled the roads could ensure that their version of events reached the populace first, shaping public perception and maintaining a unified narrative. They could swiftly issue orders to suppress rebellions, organize defenses, or direct trade, all based on the timely arrival of crucial reports. This ability to react swiftly to events, armed with current information, was a profound advantage in an age where delays could be catastrophic. Conversely, the disruption of these lines of communication could cripple a kingdom's ability to respond. Imagine an enemy intentionally blocking key roads, capturing messengers, or spreading false information. Such tactics could sow chaos, isolate garrisons, and prevent reinforcements from arriving, rendering a well-structured kingdom vulnerable and disoriented. A rebellion might gain ground simply because the king's forces couldn't receive orders or intelligence in time. This vulnerability underscores how profoundly dependent medieval rulers were on their infrastructure, not just for physical control, but for the very management of knowledge and directives. It highlights that the hidden anatomy of control extended not just to the tangible movement of people and goods, but to the invisible yet indispensable currents of information that truly bound the kingdom together. Beyond the practical considerations of military movement and economic flow, the intricate network of roads and cities served an equally crucial, though often overlooked, purpose: fostering cultural unification across the kingdom. Imagine medieval society fragmented by local customs and dialects, constantly seeking a shared identity. Pilgrimage routes, often coinciding with the very trade roads we have discussed, became powerful conduits for this cultural integration. People from disparate regions would undertake arduous journeys to venerate saints, visit holy relics, or fulfill religious vows. These journeys were transformative, not just spiritually, but socially. Along these paths, pilgrims exchanged stories, shared traditions, and experienced a broader world beyond their immediate villages. This constant movement of people facilitated the spread of common religious beliefs, rituals, and even everyday language, subtly knitting together the diverse tapestry of medieval life. The influence wasn't limited to religious travel. Royal patronage of urban art and architecture played a pivotal role in solidifying a shared identity under the crown. Rulers understood the power of visual symbols and grand structures. They commissioned magnificent cathedrals, municipal buildings, and even elaborate city gates that proudly displayed their heraldry and celebrated their reign. These projects not only provided employment for skilled artisans and laborers, drawing people to urban centers, but they also served as tangible expressions of royal power and legitimacy. When a peasant from a remote village visited a bustling city and saw a towering cathedral adorned with the king's emblem, it reinforced the idea of a unified kingdom under a single, divinely appointed ruler. Furthermore, the very design and embellishment of these public spaces promoted a sense of collective belonging. Statues of saints revered across the kingdom, frescoes depicting biblical narratives, and even the architectural styles themselves created a shared aesthetic and cultural narrative. This was a subtle form of cultural engineering, cultivating a sense of loyalty and shared destiny that transcended local allegiances. A king who invested in building and beautifying his cities was not just demonstrating his wealth, he was actively shaping the cultural landscape, encouraging his subjects to see themselves as part of a grander, unified realm, all under his benevolent, or at least powerful, dominion. This strategic blend of spiritual journey and royal display helped to solidify the abstract concept of a kingdom into a tangible, lived reality for its inhabitants. The imposing presence of castles, the organized nature of cities, and the very existence of well-maintained roads had a profound psychological impact on the medieval populace. These were not just functional structures, they were constant, visible reminders of the ruler's immense power, his unyielding authority, and his unwavering ability to enforce both order and justice throughout the land. Think about it, for a simple peasant living in a small, often isolated village, the sight of a sprawling stone fortress dominating the horizon was a powerful declaration. It spoke of wealth, military might, and an established hierarchy that reached far beyond their immediate world. This omnipresent symbolism instilled a complex blend of both fear and reassurance. The fear stemmed from the understanding that this power could crush dissent, enforce harsh laws, and demand unwavering loyalty. Rebellions were often swiftly and brutally put down, and the castle stood as a stark reminder of the consequences of defiance. Yet there was also reassurance. The same strong walls that intimidated also offered protection from bandits, rival lords, or even foreign invaders. A well-maintained road system meant that goods could reach markets, justice could be delivered, and the king's peace, however rigid, offered a degree of predictability in an often unpredictable world. This dual psychological effect contributed significantly to the hidden control exerted by the monarchy by subtly shaping public perception, influencing behavior, and reinforcing the established social order without the constant need for overt force. Moreover, the sheer scale and longevity of these structures conveyed a sense of permanence and inevitability about the ruling class. A castle that had stood for centuries, or a city whose walls had seen generations come and go, suggested a power that was not fleeting but deeply rooted, almost timeless. This visual consistency helped to normalize and legitimize the hierarchy, making it seem like the natural order of things. When people saw the king's banner flying over a distant castle or walked along a road built decades ago, they were internalizing the message that this system was robust, enduring, and the only truly stable way of life. This psychological conditioning, deeply embedded in the everyday landscape, was a powerful, often subconscious mechanism of control, shaping the very mindset of the kingdom's inhabitants. The ever-present need to defend against attack, and conversely, the drive to conquer, fueled a continuous cycle of innovation in medieval warfare, especially in the realm of siege techniques and defensive architecture. Castles weren't static structures, they were constantly evolving, becoming more sophisticated and formidable instruments of control. Imagine the early motte and bailey castles, essentially wooden towers on earthen mounds, relatively easy to burn. But as siege technology advanced with tools like trebuchets and more powerful battering rams, castle builders responded by constructing massive stone walls, concentric defenses, and strategically placed towers that allowed for enfilading fire to rain down on attackers. This arms race meant that each new siege engine developed by an attacker would inevitably be countered by a new defensive feature in castle design. For instance, the invention of the trebuchet, capable of hurling huge stones over walls, led to the development of thicker, taller curtain walls and the strategic placement of external defensive features like moats and barbicans, forcing attackers to spend more time and resources just to reach the main defenses. These innovations made castles incredibly difficult to take, turning them into virtually impregnable strongholds that projected overwhelming power and served as undeniable symbols of the ruler's authority, effectively deterring rebellion and asserting dominance over vast territories. Their sheer resilience and the human ingenuity poured into their construction made them central to maintaining order. Similarly, the constant demand for efficient movement of troops, goods, and information spurred significant innovations in road building and bridge construction. Early medieval roads might have been little more than worn paths, but as kingdoms grew and consolidated power, the need for reliable infrastructure became paramount. Engineers began to incorporate more sophisticated techniques, drawing on forgotten Roman methods or developing new ones. We see improvements in drainage, making roads usable in all weather conditions, and the construction of more robust bridges over challenging rivers and ravines. These weren't always grand, paved highways, but even simple improvements like regular maintenance, clearing of obstacles, and the strategic placement of way stations or bridges could dramatically cut travel times and increase the carrying capacity of these vital arteries. This enhanced connectivity allowed armies to be mobilized and deployed with unprecedented speed, ensuring that a rebellion could be swiftly quashed or a border incursion quickly met. Food and supplies could reach growing urban centers more reliably, and crucial messages from the king could travel across the realm much faster. This continuous adaptation, both in defensive architecture and in logistical infrastructure, vividly demonstrates the dynamic nature of medieval control mechanisms. It wasn't just about building something and letting it stand. It was about an ongoing process of refinement and innovation driven by practical needs and the ever-present realities of warfare and governance. The ingenuity displayed in these advancements allowed medieval rulers to extend their reach, consolidate their power, and maintain order in an increasingly complex world. These improvements weren't just for military might. They trickled down to benefit trade, communication, and ultimately, the ability of the central authority to govern effectively, ensuring that the hidden network of control remained robust and responsive to changing circumstances. Beyond the grand castles and vital roads, another powerful layer of control was woven into the very fabric of medieval urban life, the meticulous planning and physical structure of cities themselves. Imagine a medieval city not just as a collection of buildings, but as a carefully orchestrated machine designed to manage its inhabitants. These urban centers, often born out of necessity for trade or defense, quickly became microcosms of the larger kingdom's control mechanisms. Their most striking feature, the towering walls and imposing gates, served a dual purpose. They offered crucial protection from invaders and bandits, a comforting shield for the city dwellers, yet simultaneously functioned as formidable instruments of internal governance. Think about it, every person, every cart of goods, every animal entering or leaving the city had to pass through one of these regulated entry and exit points. This wasn't merely for security, it provided the ruling authority, whether the king, a powerful lord, or the city council, an unprecedented level of oversight. At these gates, tolls could be efficiently collected on incoming and outgoing goods, a direct and continuous source of revenue that fueled the city's administration and contributed to the coffers of the kingdom. Furthermore, these choke points allowed for the monitoring of populations, tracking who came and went, identifying strangers, and keeping tabs on potential threats to order. In times of unrest, the gates could be swiftly closed, trapping insurgents or preventing outside agitators from entering, allowing for the quick suppression of dissent within the city walls. This physical barrier was a powerful tool for maintaining both external defense and internal discipline, ensuring that the city remained a controlled and manageable entity within the broader network of the kingdom. The physical layout of the city itself was often a testament to this underlying principle of control. Most medieval cities were organized around a central market square and a prominent church or cathedral. This seemingly organic arrangement was, in fact, a deliberate design for social organization and oversight. The market, as the economic heart, was easily accessible from all parts of the city, but its centralized location made it simple to supervise transactions, enforce fair pricing, and collect taxes on trade. The church, towering above the surrounding buildings, was not just a spiritual beacon but also a powerful symbol of authority, its presence reinforcing established social hierarchies and moral codes. Public spaces were often designed to accommodate ceremonies, proclamations, and gatherings, offering easily controllable environments for disseminating information and reinforcing the ruler's decrees. The narrow, winding streets that characterized many medieval cities, while appearing chaotic, also served to limit the movement of large, unruly crowds, making it difficult for riots to gain momentum and easier for a small force to quell disturbances. Every alleyway and open square was, in a subtle way, part of the apparatus of governance. This integration of protection and control through urban planning highlights how deeply intertwined the physical environment was with the exercise of power in the medieval period. The walls and gates, the central market, the dominant church, and even the street plan weren't just architectural features. They were extensions of the governing body's will, ensuring that the city functioned as a well-ordered, revenue-generating, and easily managed component of the kingdom. It made urban planning a sophisticated tool in the hidden anatomy of control, transforming what might seem like mere infrastructure into a highly effective mechanism for asserting and maintaining dominion over the people who called these cities home. While the meticulous planning of cities with their walls and gates offered one layer of control, the power dynamics extended beyond terrestrial pathways. Consider the often unseen highways of the medieval world, its vast network of rivers and waterways. Although roads were undeniably crucial for movement and communication, especially for swift messengers and armies, rivers often served as equally, if not more, important arteries for commerce, particularly for the transportation of bulk goods. Imagine the sheer effort it would take to move tons of grain, timber, or stone overland without modern machinery. Rivers offered a natural, efficient, and cost-effective solution, turning them into vital economic lifelines. This inherent logistical advantage meant that many medieval castles and cities didn't just spring up randomly. They were strategically positioned around river crossings, along navigable stretches, or at crucial port locations. This placement wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate choice that afforded rulers immense power. By controlling these key points, a lord or a king could effectively control river traffic, much like a modern government controls its borders or major highways. This allowed them to levy tolls on passing boats and barges laden with goods, transforming the flow of trade into a steady stream of revenue for the crown or local aristocracy. These watery taxes, often hidden from casual observation, were a significant source of income, funding armies, castle garrisons, and state administration. Beyond economic control, these riverine strongholds also played a critical role in defense. A castle overlooking a river crossing could prevent enemy armies from advancing, while a fortified port could defend against waterborne incursions, protecting the heartland of the kingdom. This dual function of economic leverage and military defense made river control an indispensable part of the hidden anatomy of medieval power. The ability to dictate who used the rivers, what goods passed through, and at what cost provided a subtle yet potent form of dominion over both trade and movement throughout the realm. This watery network thus provided another, often overlooked, layer of strategic control, profoundly shaping the wealth and security of any medieval kingdom. Beyond the strategic placement of castles, the vital arteries of roads, and the flowing networks of rivers, another, equally critical layer of medieval control was woven into the very fabric of the land itself. This was the meticulous, almost obsessive process of mapping and documenting every inch of the kingdom, all to facilitate the lifeblood of any realm, taxation. A king's power was intrinsically linked to his ability to extract resources from his subjects and their land. This wasn't just about collecting money. It was about knowing precisely what resources were available, where they were located, and who controlled them. Imagine for a moment the scale of this undertaking without modern mapping tools or satellite imagery. Yet, medieval rulers undertook astonishingly detailed surveys, creating what we might consider the earliest forms of land registries. These were not mere lists. They were comprehensive inventories that catalogued everything from the number of plows available in a village to the acreage of arable land, the number of cattle, and even the number of serfs tied to a particular manor. The goal was simple but profound: to turn the sprawling, complex reality of a kingdom into a quantifiable, measurable asset. Perhaps the most famous example of this administrative prowess is England's Domesday Book, commissioned by William the Conqueror in the year 1085. This monumental survey was an exhaustive inventory of every piece of land in England, who owned it, and what it was worth. It was a painstaking process that took months, with royal commissioners fanning out across the country, questioning local lords, priests, and peasants under oath. They recorded land holdings, population figures, resources like mills and fisheries, and crucially, the value of each estate before and after the conquest. The name Domesday itself speaks volumes, implying a judgment from which there could be no appeal, much like the Last Judgment. It cemented William's authority, allowing him to systematically assess taxes, consolidate his power, and understand the economic potential of his newly won kingdom with unprecedented precision. This mapping of the kingdom went far beyond simple geography. It was a sophisticated level of administrative control over the very fabric of the land and its inhabitants. By having such detailed records, the Crown could ensure that everyone paid their fair share, or more often, their required share. It minimized opportunities for evasion, identified untapped resources, and provided a clear picture of the kingdom's economic strength. This systematic knowledge was a silent, powerful weapon in the ruler's arsenal, allowing them to predict revenues, plan military campaigns, and understand potential areas of economic growth or vulnerability. Without this deep understanding of their territorial assets, medieval rulers would have been governing in the dark, unable to effectively project their power or maintain stability. Beyond the meticulous mapping of land and resources, another powerful force shaped the anatomy of medieval kingdoms: the pervasive influence of religious institutions. Cathedrals and monasteries, far from being mere places of worship, acted in concert with royal power, extending the kingdom's social and moral control into every aspect of daily life. They were often positioned in or near major cities, strategically located along key trade routes and pilgrimage paths, making them highly visible and accessible symbols of both spiritual and temporal authority. These grand structures and their associated communities served as vital centers of education, preserving ancient texts and fostering literacy, particularly among the clergy and aristocratic elite. Monasteries often ran schools, providing the only formal learning available for many centuries. They were also hubs of charity, offering alms to the poor, care for the sick, and hospitality to travelers, thereby fulfilling social welfare roles that no other institution could provide. Through their spiritual guidance, they reinforced existing social hierarchies, teaching peasants and nobles alike that their place in society was divinely ordained, fostering obedience to both God and king. This subtle yet powerful form of social engineering helped maintain order and stability within the realm, making the church an indispensable partner in governance. The economic power of these religious institutions cannot be overstated. Cathedrals and monasteries often held vast tracts of land, granted to them by pious rulers or wealthy nobles seeking spiritual merit. These extensive landholdings made them significant economic players, controlling large agricultural estates, mills, and even entire villages. They generated considerable wealth through farming, trade, and donations, contributing to the overall economy of the kingdom. However, this wealth also made them subject to royal oversight and taxation. Kings frequently sought to leverage the church's resources for their own purposes, whether through direct taxes on church lands, forced loans, or by appointing loyal bishops and abbots who would support royal policy. This intricate dance between spiritual authority and temporal power often defined the political landscape, illustrating how the church, despite its independence, was deeply integrated into the kingdom's hidden network of control. Its widespread influence, both moral and economic, ensured that the church remained a crucial pillar in the structure of medieval power. Beyond the careful management of physical resources, the anatomy of medieval kingdoms also had a crucial and often brutal function: suppressing dissent. The very interconnected network of castles, roads, and cities that enabled royal control and prosperity was just as instrumental in swiftly crushing internal rebellions and challenges to the established order. When unrest simmered in a distant province or a powerful lord defied the crown, the kingdom's infrastructure became a weapon. Royal forces could be rapidly deployed through the efficient road networks. These weren't haphazard movements. Instead, they were calculated maneuvers, swiftly moving disciplined troops from one fortified stronghold to another. Imagine a king receiving news of a peasant uprising in a far-off county. His first move would be to dispatch messengers along the carefully maintained roads to the nearest loyal castle. From there, the garrison, often already on high alert, would be mobilized, potentially reinforced by troops arriving via the same routes from other parts of the kingdom. This quick reaction time, facilitated by the interconnected roadways, was critical in preventing small fires of rebellion from becoming uncontrollable conflagrations. Furthermore, the castles themselves served as indispensable bases for counter-insurgency operations. During times of rebellion, a castle wasn't just a defensive structure. It became a command center, a staging ground, and a secure refuge for royal authority in a hostile territory. From these fortified points, loyal forces could launch patrols, gather intelligence about rebel movements, and intercept supplies. Rebels, on the other hand, found themselves constantly battling against a system designed to outmaneuver and contain them. Besieging a well-supplied castle was a formidable, often impossible, task for poorly equipped or untrained rebels, forcing them to exhaust their resources and morale. The inability to dislodge royal power from these strongholds often spelled the doom of their cause. Thus, the very infrastructure designed for peaceful administration, trade, and communication could be turned with devastating effectiveness against those who dared to challenge the established order. This highlights a fundamental and often ironclad power dynamic in medieval society. The same roads that carried pilgrims and merchants also carried armies, and the same castles that protected communities could also enforce submission. The presence of this integrated control mechanism, ready to pivot from governance to suppression at a moment's notice, served as a powerful deterrent against large-scale revolts, reminding everyone that while the king's peace offered stability, defiance would be met with overwhelming force. However, this intricate network of castles, roads, and cities served a higher purpose, one often referred to as the king's peace. This wasn't merely the absence of war, but rather a carefully cultivated state of relative order and security throughout the realm, a bedrock upon which medieval society could function. By methodically controlling movement, regulating commerce, and orchestrating the flow of vital information, medieval rulers aimed to foster an environment where agriculture could yield bountiful harvests, trade routes could hum with activity, and social life could unfold with a degree of predictability. This established order was not just a benevolent aspiration. It was the ultimate, overarching goal that legitimized their rule and solidified their authority in the eyes of their subjects. Think of it this way: a kingdom constantly plagued by banditry, internal feuds, or rampant lawlessness simply couldn't thrive. Farmers wouldn't risk planting crops if they feared raiders would destroy them. Merchants wouldn't transport goods if their convoys were routinely plundered, and ordinary people wouldn't feel secure in their homes or on the roads. The king's peace, therefore, was the promise of stability enforced by the very infrastructure we've been discussing. The presence of royal castles, even if seemingly distant, projected the king's reach, reminding potential troublemakers that justice, or at least royal retribution, was never far. The well-maintained roads facilitated the swift arrival of royal justice, whether in the form of tax collectors or armed retinues, ensuring that decrees were obeyed and order was upheld. This carefully constructed peace was a powerful tool for legitimization. A ruler who consistently delivered stability and protection gained the loyalty and cooperation of their subjects, making their governance seem divinely sanctioned or at least inherently beneficial. When a king could guarantee safe passage for travelers, protect markets from thieves, and swiftly put down insurrections, he demonstrated his competence and his right to rule. This created a positive feedback loop. The infrastructure enabled the king's peace, and the king's peace, in turn, bolstered the king's authority and encouraged further development of the very systems that maintained it. Without this foundational order, the entire edifice of the medieval kingdom, with all its intricate power structures and economic activities, would have crumbled. It was the quiet, constant hum of routine, the ability to engage in daily life without constant fear, that proved the hidden network's ultimate success. Many of the underlying principles of control we've explored in the medieval context, particularly those involving centralized administration, strategic infrastructure, economic leverage, and the meticulous management of information, didn't simply vanish with the decline of feudalism. Instead, they adapted and evolved, continuing to influence modern governance in profound ways. If you peel back the layers of our contemporary societies, you'll find the indelible marks of these medieval innovations. For instance, the very concept of a central government maintaining order across a vast territory, collecting taxes, and enforcing laws harks back to the administrative machinery honed within medieval castles and royal courts. The medieval king's efforts to project authority through a network of local officials and military garrisons finds a modern echo in our national bureaucracies and law enforcement agencies, which likewise depend on a distributed presence to ensure compliance and order. Consider the role of strategic infrastructure. While medieval roads and castles served as vital conduits for projecting power, today's governments invest heavily in highways, railways, air travel, and digital networks. These modern arteries of commerce and communication are just as crucial for economic prosperity, national security, and administrative efficiency as their medieval predecessors were. Just as a medieval lord controlled key trade routes to levy tolls, modern states exert control over critical infrastructure to regulate economies, ensure national security, and facilitate the movement of goods and people. The strategic placement of ports, airports, and data centers today mirrors the careful positioning of castles at river crossings or mountain passes in centuries past, demonstrating an enduring understanding that physical and digital pathways are fundamental to controlling a nation's flow. Moreover, the economic leverage exerted by medieval rulers through tolls and controlled marketplaces has transformed into sophisticated tax systems, central banks, and regulatory bodies that shape our modern economies. The medieval king's ability to fund his armies and administration by taxing trade and land laid the groundwork for the fiscal policies that underpin all contemporary states. The strategic use of economic power to influence behavior and ensure loyalty, whether through subsidies, tariffs, or fiscal incentives, is a direct descendant of the hidden economic control mechanisms perfected in the medieval period. The fundamental idea that wealth generation can be harnessed and directed to serve the state's objectives remains a cornerstone of governance. Perhaps most subtly, the management of information has evolved from royal messengers on well-maintained roads to global communication networks and sophisticated intelligence agencies. Medieval rulers understood that controlling the flow of information, whether through royal edicts or the suppression of dissent, was paramount to maintaining power. Today, governments still prioritize information control, utilizing everything from public information campaigns to advanced surveillance technologies to shape public opinion and maintain order. The underlying principle that knowledge is power and controlling its dissemination is key to governance is a timeless lesson carried forward from the medieval age. Understanding these enduring principles provides valuable insights into the fundamental mechanisms of power and control that transcend historical periods, revealing that the skeleton of their system remains surprisingly relevant in our highly connected world. Yet, for all this discussion of strategic placement and economic leverage, we must not overlook the fundamental human element that truly powered this intricate medieval system of control: the peasants and the urban workers. The construction and ongoing maintenance of those imposing castles, the sprawling network of roads, and the bustling cities themselves relied almost entirely on their relentless labor. This was another profound layer of hidden control, often masked by the sheer scale of the infrastructure. Imagine the sheer physical effort involved. Building a castle wasn't a matter of simply drawing up plans. It meant countless hours of quarrying stone, felling timber, shaping and lifting immense blocks, all under incredibly harsh conditions. Roads weren't magically appearing, they were cleared, leveled, and often paved by hand, requiring constant repair against the ravages of weather and heavy use. And the cities, with their intricate buildings, walls, and defenses, demanded an unending supply of skilled and unskilled labor. This labor was often not voluntary, but instead a form of forced service known as corvée labor, a direct manifestation of the feudal lord's authority. Peasants were obligated to dedicate a certain number of days each year to working on the lord's projects, whether it was tilling his fields, repairing his castle walls, or maintaining the local roads. This wasn't merely about completing tasks, it was a constant physical reminder of their subjugated status and their direct contribution to the very system that controlled them. Their sweat and toil literally were the unseen mortar of the kingdom, binding together the physical manifestations of power. Beyond direct labor, the produce of their fields and their crafts often went directly to fuel the system through taxes and levies. A farmer's grain not only fed his family but also fed the castle's garrison. The weaver's cloth might outfit the lord's court. Every aspect of their existence was, in a very real sense, a component of the kingdom's anatomy. Even in the burgeoning towns and cities where different forms of labor prevailed, the principle of hidden control persisted. Guilds, while offering some protection and autonomy to their members, also functioned within a framework dictated by royal charters and urban authorities. These charters often stipulated what could be produced, how it could be sold, and at what price, ensuring that the urban economy served the broader interests of the kingdom and its rulers. The urban worker, whether a mason, a carpenter, or a merchant, contributed their skills and their tax revenues to the coffers of the lord or monarch, directly or indirectly fueling the same infrastructure that defined their lives. So, while castles and roads represented the visible sinews of power, it was the ceaseless endeavors of the peasantry and the urban populace that provided the very lifeblood, the hidden energy that made the medieval kingdom function. Their forced contributions, their daily grind, were an essential and often overlooked aspect of how control was not just maintained, but literally built from the ground up. And yet, despite the immense human effort and the inherent challenges of managing such a vast and complex system, this medieval anatomy of control, the network of castles, roads, and cities, demonstrated a truly remarkable resilience. Medieval Europe was not a tranquil place. It was a continent constantly reshaped by invasions from Norsemen, Magyars, and Mongols, ravaged by devastating plagues like the Black Death, and torn apart by ceaseless internal conflicts, civil wars, and rebellions among ambitious nobles. Any one of these pressures could have shattered a less robust system, yet time and again the core structure absorbed these shocks and managed to re-establish a semblance of order and control. Think about the sheer adaptability of its components. Castles, for example, were not static defensive structures. Their designs constantly evolved, incorporating new technologies and strategies to withstand ever more sophisticated siege warfare. From simple motte and bailey constructions to formidable concentric stone fortresses, each iteration represented an adaptation to changing military realities. This meant that even when a castle was breached or captured, its underlying strategic value, its location, its connection to roads, its role as a local administrative hub remained, allowing it to be rebuilt, garrisoned anew, and quickly integrated back into the network of control. The constant innovation in defensive architecture was a testament to the system's ability to learn and strengthen itself. Similarly, the road networks, though vulnerable to neglect or deliberate destruction during conflicts, possessed an inherent flexibility. While major arteries were crucial, the sheer density of local paths and alternative routes often meant that a disrupted segment could be bypassed or quickly repaired. The need for commerce, communication, and military movement was so fundamental that these routes were almost always prioritized for reconstruction. Even after devastating events like a plague, which drastically reduced populations, the framework of roads and cities remained, serving as the essential scaffolding upon which societies could rebuild. The human need for connection and trade ensured that these vital arteries would always be maintained, even if by a struggling populace. The cities themselves, despite being targets for siege and destruction, often acted as resilient centers for recovery. Their established marketplaces, guilds, and administrative structures provided a framework for economic and social revival. Even after being sacked, the strategic advantages of their location, access to trade routes, defensive positions, or fertile hinterlands, meant they were quickly repopulated and rebuilt. Lords and monarchs understood that the prosperity of their kingdoms was intrinsically linked to the health of their urban centers, pushing for their swift restoration. This inherent ability to absorb devastating blows and then quickly mend itself underscores the robustness of this integrated power structure. It wasn't just a system built to endure, it was a system designed to bounce back, to continuously reassert control and dominance even in the face of overwhelming adversity. This persistent ability to recover and rebuild made the medieval kingdom a truly resilient entity, far more than just a collection of fragile parts. Yet, for all its resilience, this intricate medieval anatomy of control was not immutable. Like shifting sands, the very foundations upon which it was built began to undergo a profound transformation under the weight of new external pressures and internal developments. The period saw the gradual, almost imperceptible decline and evolution of this highly effective system, marking a pivotal moment in the history of governance and power. It wasn't a sudden collapse but a slow, deliberate metamorphosis where the underlying principles of networked control persisted, albeit in drastically altered forms. The old hidden anatomy merely transformed, rather than disappearing entirely. One of the most significant external pressures that spurred this evolution was the rise of gunpowder. For centuries, the formidable stone walls of castles had stood as impregnable symbols of authority, their designs constantly adapting to the latest siege technologies. Yet, the advent of powerful cannons and artillery fundamentally changed the calculus of warfare. Stone walls that once offered unparalleled protection became vulnerable to sustained bombardment, turning symbols of strength into potential death traps. Suddenly, the military primacy of the castle as a strategic stronghold began to wane, its physical dominance challenged by a technological innovation that rendered its most defining feature, its defensive strength, increasingly obsolete. This wasn't an immediate obsolescence as castles continued to be used, but their role shifted dramatically from unassailable fortresses to administrative centers or even luxury residences, mirroring a broader change in the nature of power. Simultaneously, new economic models and burgeoning trade routes began to reshape the medieval landscape. The localized, agrarian-based economies that flourished under the castle's protection gradually gave way to more complex, centralized systems of finance and commerce. The rise of powerful merchant guilds, international trading companies, and eventually, state-sponsored economic enterprises meant that wealth accumulation was no longer solely tied to land and its produce, but increasingly to capital and global trade. This shift diminished the direct economic leverage of individual lords, whose power was largely derived from their control over discrete territories and their associated resources. As money economies grew, the ability to tax and manage vast commercial networks became more important than merely collecting tolls at a castle gate, fundamentally altering where and how economic power was wielded. Coupled with these shifts were internal developments in the nature of governance itself. The fragmented feudal system, with its myriad of semi-autonomous lords and localized power centers, slowly gave way to more centralized forms of government. Monarchs, increasingly empowered by new sources of wealth and larger, standing armies, sought to consolidate their authority and bypass the traditional feudal hierarchy. This led to the emergence of powerful nation-states, where control emanated directly from the crown and its newly established bureaucratic apparatus, rather than being dispersed through a network of feudal loyalties and fortified strongholds. The need for a centralized administration capable of managing national finances, maintaining a unified legal system, and projecting power across a wider geographic area necessitated new forms of control that transcended the old castle and road paradigm. Therefore, while castles lost their military primacy and the strict feudal relationships began to erode, the underlying principles of networked control persisted, albeit in new guises. The concept of strategic infrastructure remained vital, but instead of castles, it manifested in naval docks, national road networks built for efficiency, and later, railways. The management of information flow continued to be critical, evolving from royal messengers on horseback to postal services and printing presses. Economic leverage shifted from localized tolls to national tariffs and centralized banking systems. The hidden anatomy of control, far from disappearing, simply transformed, adapting its skin to a changing world while its skeletal structure of power and influence continued to evolve and shape societies for centuries to come. We have journeyed through the intricate anatomy of medieval kingdoms, revealing how castles, roads, and cities were not isolated features but integral components of a sophisticated, hidden network of control. This complex system was truly ingenious, how every element worked in concert to solidify royal power and manage the populace, creating a cohesive and surprisingly resilient structure. From the strategic placement of fortresses dictating trade and securing vital junctions, to the carefully planned roads enabling rapid military response and efficient communication, and the bustling cities serving as indispensable economic and administrative hubs, each piece played a crucial role in maintaining order and extending the reach of central authority. It's fascinating to see how the physical landscape was sculpted and utilized to reinforce social and political hierarchies. This deep dive into medieval history offers a profound understanding of how centralized authority was established and maintained, providing timeless lessons about the dynamics of power that remain remarkably relevant today. Though the specific technologies and social structures have changed dramatically, the core principles of strategic infrastructure, economic leverage, information control, and the psychological impact of visible power continue to shape our world. The way medieval rulers used these elements provides a fascinating blueprint for understanding how power is consolidated and exercised across different eras. It makes you wonder, in our own time, what are the modern equivalents of these hidden networks of control? If you found this exploration as illuminating as we did, unraveling the subtle yet profound ways medieval societies were organized, please consider subscribing to our channel for more journeys into the past and explorations of hidden histories. We love digging into these often overlooked aspects of history that truly shape our understanding of the world. Also, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What surprised you most about the hidden anatomy of medieval kingdoms? Was it the economic control through tolls, the detailed planning of road networks, or perhaps the psychological impact of castle architecture? Share your insights in the comments below, and let's continue to uncover these fascinating stories together. Your engagement helps us bring more of these captivating narratives to light.